What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, or one of your hosts for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V.
And I guess that just makes me some guy, Kodey Stoffer here.
You're my co-host, and welcome back to the Playmakers Corner. Here, we're continuing our culture series, basically talking about all things Colorado football. We talked about college, or at least we recorded that one, and we have a bunch of topics coming up, but this is definitely a topic that we did not cover on the original culture series episode. In fact, or actually we didn't even mention it, I would say, because it wasn't a thing yet. We knew it was the next step in the development of Colorado football. But, at the time, there were just some questions out there for sure. And in that time, we kind of, I would say we've tried to build our way towards making this more of a reality. But this episode is just about girls high school flag football here in Colorado, the state of it, talking about, everything from the first season, our reactions to that, and, everything involving that and the future moving forward. Right, Kodey?
Yeah, obviously we couldn't talk about it before it was a thing, but, in talking about other states and where they were with football, and the states that are really serious about football, we saw girls flag football as, a growing thing in those states, and definitely learned a lot about the sport in general over the past few years and different iterations. And, it meant a lot to see it come to Colorado, but that doesn't come without some constructive criticism for sure.
No, absolutely not. And obviously, we're going to be pretty understanding as it was the first year, and it's not technically, officially a CHASA sanctioned sport yet. It's in that pilot mode, which it will be for another 2 more years. Is it 1 more year?
It's 1 to 2 more years for sure. But,
okay,
at the rate that we saw it at, the interest is there for it to definitely be a CHASA sanctioned sport. And I'd say a lot faster than some of the other trial sports that I've seen personally over the years through CHASA. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. And, I'm just going to throw this out there as well. Colorado doesn't become a football state unless girls high school flag football is a big deal, and is up to level and is up to par, and I think it's a really good opportunity to help raise the level of Colorado high school football just in general, because I would definitely say that we are behind as a state when it comes to high school football, definitely for the boys, because no one passes the ball, and that's, hey, check out our coaching episode on that, where we talk about coaching and all of that great stuff and the importance of that. But we definitely cannot afford to also be behind in women's football as well, and the opportunities there and all of that great stuff. We just can't. We're at a point where women's football is, it's not hitting a peak yet, but it's growing, and it's growing by a ton. And you see all the colleges that we've been covering, offering women's college flag football and giving their athletes scholarships and going and winning championships and awards and all this great stuff, getting recognized and getting opportunities to go play, competitive flag football, which is definitely a big deal and a step towards eventually the NCAA making that a legit thing. And, I do, this is the intro in general, so I just want to mention this, but I do want to shout out the Suncast podcast real quick, because they interviewed one of those program leaders in head coach Jeff Molesky out of Weber, which is one of the top flag football programs in the country. And, he definitely said that he believes, well, this is definitely a fact, but in 2 to 5 years, there's going to be at least 25 consistent programs on the NAIA level. And I want to say he said in 3 to 5, you could definitely see it on the NCAA level. So players that are freshmen right now could very much likely be getting offered full rides on the NCAA level, or much more significant scholarship money to go play this sport. That's definitely an opportunity, and so Colorado can't afford to be behind. And I'm really happy that it's a thing right now. It's a sport right now. We're getting started. We're on the way. The sport is on its way to becoming a lot more official here in the state. So there you go. But Kodey, is there anything you want to say about women's flag football and all of that great stuff before we kind of head into the meat of this episode?
Yeah, I just want to point out, too, for those that aren't in the know, that, Colorado, we're not just talking about competing against other football states when it comes to women's flag football. We're talking about other countries in North America that are sending their athletes to college. It's very, very big in Mexico right now, and, there's other squads like Panama and stuff that, are sending athletes to play college flag football. So, for Colorado flag football, it puts even a little bit more pressure to get the ball rolling because, this isn't just, you're not just competing with people from, not just bordering states, not just states, up in the Northeast, not just Florida, not just California, but you're competing against national talent, and the national talent's good. We've broken down the film of some international athletes, and they're legit, and they're already, playing this sport and getting top tier coaching from, international squads. They're playing for their country at times. And yeah, that's just all the more reason. And honestly, it puts a lot of pressure for Colorado to figure it out sooner rather than later, especially to give, these young women chances at furthering their education and furthering their athletic careers, especially. Yeah, the heat is on. Not just, like I said, not just in the USA, but, by neighboring countries. It's serious.
And speaking of neighboring countries, this is also a sport that is being considered for the next Olympics, not the one in Paris, but I want to say it would be LA, right? Here in 2028, because the next Olympics is 2024, technically. So there you go. So there's definitely going to be some international interest. I would say if you want to compare some countries to Colorado as far as women's football and women's flag football goes, there's whole countries that are way ahead of Colorado as a state, way ahead of some cities in Colorado and all of that stuff, and it's not just they're a couple inches, no, they're miles ahead. I'm just gonna keep it 100 with you, and a lot of those young players do play, on the college level. Kodey, you mentioned Panama. That's a big one. That's actually a powerhouse. The elite of the elite, the best of the best from that country comes here, and they're some of the best in the United States. That's what it's looking like, I would still say the United States, is number one in football, but don't get it twisted. When it comes to women's flag football, that gap is a lot more narrow than Americans would love to believe, but that's just an American culture thing in general. We're talking about Colorado culture stuff, and so let's go ahead and hop into this episode right here. Kodey, let's start with this last season. It was the first one ever. The Denver Broncos, they were the ones who really got this thing going, as, is pretty normal for most NFL teams at this point. At this point, it's really an expectation for an NFL team to be a supporter of women's flag football and help get it started in your state. There's very few teams that haven't gotten behind that so far, but, Oh, and by the way, go ahead and listen. I should have said this in our intro, but go ahead and listen to our recaps from this last 2023 NAIA women's flag football season. Hopefully when this episode is coming out, it's potentially around the time of the national tournament, which I believe Kodey will be going to, so that'll be exciting. But make sure you listen to those episodes as well and whatnot. But anyways, back to Colorado. Kodey, this last season was the first season. What were some raw takeaways from it? Actually, what was your reaction to, women's flag football coming to the high school level here in Colorado?
Well, Simon, I'd say that you and myself and other people in the know were very, very excited for the prospect of watching girls high school flag football here, especially having, done research into other high schools across the country and watching that kind of, and get the names of players and break down their film and do interviews with them, and then getting very excited at the chance of doing that here in our own state, But you and I would quickly come to find out that it was really hard to find anything out. I think is the biggest, that's the big first page turn of this whole thing, was basically chasing our tail, trying to figure out when and where, what teams were playing took a really long time to figure out. And then where were they playing? When were they playing? No idea on who is who, really, as far as like identifying players. And, just the frustration of trying to cover something that was not provided with easy coverage, if that makes sense. I mean, you were able to attend a weekend or a few weekends of regular season stuff, but it wasn't through anybody at CHASA that we were able to get information from. It was really hard to contact the, Jeffco director. We tried reaching out to him and, other public school kind of athletic directors and the districts to try and figure out what the schedules were and when they were playing. And it was a real pain in the neck. And I mean, as people who are passionate about the sport, it was very frustrating. And I mean, thank goodness it was, I guess, a little bit easier to find out information on the end of the season tournament. And, I think that the setup that they had was pretty solid there. But, we kind of went in blind a little bit as far as, what we were looking at, who we were looking at. And outside of the initial seeding, we didn't have too much to really go off of.
I do want to shout out Big John over at Team Full Gorilla TFG. He slid up on, I guess, one of our posts about women's flag football, which was just, I think it was like the Broncos or something, announcing that, like, there was a coaches meeting, I believe. And it was also a big review of like all the teams who would be participating in this initial season. And so Big John, he slid up on that. And, I just straight up asked him like, hey man, do you know any information about this and whatnot? And I didn't know if he was going to have anything, but he said his daughter, who I'm not going to say what school she went to, but his daughter was a quarterback and she was going to be playing this season. And so he gave me the information from her packet from her high school. So that's how we came across that. I think that's definitely a story we got to put out there because, Kodey, you're right. We reached out to all the athletic directors, all the district athletic directors, CHASA, which I don't blame them as much. It is kind of a piloting thing, but, we had the same results regardless. But we reached out to CHASA. I think the only one we didn't reach out to were the Broncos, which I don't even know how to approach that at that point because there was like no information out about who in the Broncos organization was kind of heading this thing up.
There was like one name listed, and
well, it wasn't listed. We found out that name on our own.
Yeah, we did
at the press conference.
At the press conference, that's right. And once again, it
at
was
media
just like,
day to start the season. Sorry,
it felt like chasing like a lot of dead ends. Regardless.
We were putting in work. No, we were putting in so much work. And I'm going to say it, Kodey, or actually here, Kodey, did we get a reply from any of the athletic directors, CHASA, anything, who we emailed more than once? and contacted more than once?
No. And this is coming from, I mean, we emailed both Coach V and I have at Playmakers Corner emails, and look, it's not like we're a new name or something. Like, athletes and coaches know who we are, and so, we emailed from there. I emailed from my personal Gmail as someone who's just interested in a growing sport. And, it was kind of a tiring conversation between Simon and I where it was, hey, have you heard back anything yet? No. Have you heard anything? No. Like, what are we supposed to do here? So that was... I'll easily say that was the biggest drawback to this first season, was just like kind of unclear and inconsistent information. And that stunk. That stunk. I as simple as that, really.
It pissed me off. I haven't been this pissed off in a really long time. And there's a lot to be mad about when it comes to covering Colorado high school football. I'm just going to be honest with you. There just is, from ADs thinking they're better than us to coaches, feeling some type of way about how we talk. Hey, sorry, coach, we can't sugarcoat your season. We're just telling you the truth. And half the time, not even that. I would say most of the time it's 90% correct. But there are a lot of things that were really frustrating about it. And the other thing frustrating about it was that, unlike a lot, I guess, of girls high school flag football around the country, it was also during the fall. It was like during football season as well. And so if you're not super familiar with this, because I'm sure there might be some college coaches or whoever listening to this, when it comes to our coverage of Colorado high school football, we cover 1 through 5A. The only football we don't cover in Colorado on the high school level is 6-man and 8-man. So we're doing season previews. We're preparing like schedules to go out to games. We're talking to a bunch of different players, coaches, scouts. Like, we are extremely busy in August. It's definitely, I would say, our busiest time of the year. And for us to have like no information, really, not even in August, but like going into September, was super frustrating. And for nobody to respond back to us as well was even more frustrating, because we're going to games, we're doing all this stuff, and we assume that the Broncos are going to put something up, but there's like no information, right? At least to the public, really. And so that was like just really frustrating to just deal with in general. And I mean, if we struggle to find that information as media, and I'm just going to be honest with you, it's going to sound prideful, but like, there's not too many other people covering Colorado football like us, then how do you think other people in general who are interested in playing, or, are like wanting to support women's sports in general, how do you think they're supposed to find that information if we had to really dig deep into our sources? And we have a lot of sources, and it was like dead end after dead end. And like I said, shout out to Big John, but golly, bro, like, well, that was trash. Go on, Cody.
Like, our coverage of this sport, even though it's not CHASA sanctioned, it is something that can help it become CHASA sanctioned, right? Because I feel like there are a lot of students that I talked to through other high schools that didn't even know that girls high school flag football was a thing in Colorado while it was happening. Or people who are reacting to our like IG story of us covering the championships, and more on that later, that were like, wait, this is a thing? And it was the final week. So like, if the students of other high schools don't know, how are you supposed to get more schools involved and really let this blossom into something awesome? And, we're really connected to, most schools, at basically every school that has a football program, right? At least a tackle football program. And so, there are schools with, in the 1A classification and the 2A classification that I think kind of felt in the dark on this. I mean, I get wanting to start in the metro area, but, these other schools that are competitive, they are elite at a ton of athletics, they probably want in on this because, it's another trophy that they can add to their case, and, they support their athletic programs enough. But if they don't know that it's happening, how is it supposed to grow, right? And if we don't know how, like, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of talking myself in a circle a little bit, but I mean, it is because it's just mind-boggling. It's confusing. It's confounding. So I was just kind of blown away by that whole issue because I literally think, Simon, you're the only one who is able to catch any regular season action.
Yeah, and that was a struggle because I mean, like I said, we really weren't able to prepare for that season at all. In fact, we were like a whole game short. Like by the time I got that information, they already played a whole tournament, And what's crazy is that they and I'm going to I'm going to talk down a little bit to the Denver Broncos as an organization. And I'm not a fan, so I really don't care. But they really put out like a whole media thing post about the very first tournament, I guess. It's not even really a tournament. It's just like a bunch of teams showing up and playing each other. And so it's kind of like scrimmages, but Jamboree. That's what they're calling it. They put out a whole media post about the very first Jamboree, but they definitely framed it like it was coming up. And I don't know. It just seemed a little deceptive. And they posted it on a Monday, a whole 2 days after the whole thing happened, And there was like nothing talking about the original Jamboree that was going to go down. Actually, in fact, one of the articles that I did found was like posted Friday afternoon, which if you're media, like just being completely honest, that's the end of the news cycle. So I'm gonna and that was from the Broncos too. So that's definitely something that I'm like, hey, do you actually care? Because you posted it Friday afternoon at the end of the news cycle. On top of that, the Jamboree was the next morning. So there's literally no way for me or Kodey to know unless we followed Broncos media like that, which I don't because I'm not a Broncos fan. And even if Kodey did, we're at football games. I'm sorry. We're driving to Eden. We're driving to Greeley. We're driving to Denver. We're driving to Pueblo, Fountain, Colorado Springs. Like, we're on the move. And so for you to do that was just really inconvenient. And we didn't even know about any of that stuff until like a couple of days later. And so, yeah, I am going to shout out the Broncos and Shasta for just handling it poorly. Like, that was really frustrating. And it really, like no one, obviously no one knew about this until like this episode was posted, but that was one of the most frustrating parts of the season, just seeing all that stuff come out afterwards and being like, dang, so ain't nobody tell us, huh? We sent out all those emails like months, like in August, literally, and it was like mid-September when all that went down. No responses still after that first Jamboree, and that really pissed me off. I'm not gonna lie. Not because I wanted to be the first one to cover it, but, we have a lot of listeners come football season, and so it would really help the sport out and help us out to, be able to cover it and be able to get more people to those Jamborees outside of parents and stuff, because that's just not going to cut it. It's obviously great that parents and family are going there to support, but you gotta, I don't know. If you want to grow the sport, you got to be smart with it. Right, Kodey? Hopefully I didn't, you don't feel some type of way about me calling out the Broncos. But, like, it's really on them. They wanted to start it, right? So,
it's like you got to follow through on something that you're doing. And, I don't know if... Because when you do things like that and it seems nearsighted, it seems way more like it was done for publicity than actually growing the sport a little bit. And so we shouldn't be in a position where we're questioning your motives for this program. And we're already, like we already talked about it, we're so behind. Like, Arizona really started girls flag football before us. You know how irritating that is? Like, come on, man, we gotta do better. And it's like, I don't know where the influence or the idea comes from, and I don't know, like, as someone who is an intern, I feel like I'm allowed to say this, but it's like they left the interns in charge of this, and like, they just said good luck, basically. And, just it feels very isolated. And that's not what sports are about, or athletics are about, or participation is about. And the worst part about it is, like, I had so much fun at the final week of the season, hosted at the, Broncos facility. I had so much fun covering it, and it was great football, and it was really entertaining. So why could we not get that for the whole season? And like Coach V said, even if we see it, we usually have our games planned out at the beginning of the season, or we make audibles in the week leading up based off of narratives and stuff from on Monday or Tuesday is when we'll decide. And, both of us work in sports and athletics, so our Saturdays are usually pretty busy. And it's we can't even work around our own work if we don't know how to. I can't go to my boss on Friday night at the end of the news cycle when something comes up and be like, oh, hey, by the way, I'd like to go to this tournament from 9 to 1:30, because it's well, I'm already doing something else. And it just doesn't give us ample time to properly cover or prepare to cover the sport, which is just a real shame. It's a shame is what it is more than anything. But,
and I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if us complaining about this is gonna get us more information sooner, but we gonna expose some people for show, with this, because just gotta be completely honest with you, we all know how women's sports gets covered, and how, in some areas in the country and whatnot, it's seen as second-hand, second class. We're not about that here on the podcast, to be honest with you. We're just not. We want to do a good job, if not even better, with women's flag football than boys football, because like I said, this is a new thing. There's opportunities out there. This is a sport that is growing, and it's vital, and I mean vital, for the state to get this thing right the first time around, so that girls do have an opportunity, first off, to just play on the high school level. I think that's huge. And then, it'll trickle down from there, hopefully, but we'll talk about that later. And then, maybe have an opportunity to go play some college ball, which is huge. And then from there, maybe even go pro. We've been talking, keeping an eye on some of the pro women's tackle football leagues here in the state. Shout out, the Denver Bandits and the Grizzlies, I believe, right now. And there's opportunities there. And so, football is it's one of those sports where there's going to be a lot of opportunities. And for this to be an emerging and growing sport, it is vital for us to cover it the right way. Even better, to a higher standard. In fact, when we do cover just women's sports in general, I expect it to be at a little bit of a higher standard than our normal stuff. I ain't even gonna lie, because of how it's been covered in the past and the history with it, right, Cody?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just scrambled eggs right now, especially thinking of all the avenues that there are, and just, I mean, it is so much bigger than just our state when you're looking at the impact of not properly attending to, it's not just a media thing, it is a futures and opportunities thing. So
yes, but let's go ahead and talk about the actual season here. Let's start with the programs, right? The schools. So there were a bunch of jamborees, there are opportunities for teams to play other schools in their district and cross district and all that stuff. So that most of these teams got to play a pretty good amount. But let me just list out those districts, and Cody, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here. It has been a little bit. But the Cherry Creek School District was one. That was a big one. Denver Public Schools, DPS, and then it was Jefferson
County Public Schools.
Yes, Jefferson County. Yeah, so those were the big three that really got this thing going. And so the schools from those districts were the first participants. And, we saw a lot of, perennial powerhouses in football and boys football, that is, be a part of this, which was great to see. Cherry Creek was out there. Chatfield was out there. Columbine was out there, which, hey, Columbine throwing the football, that always throws you for a loop. But hey, that's a step in the right direction, in my opinion. Arvada West was a big player. Denver South was out there. Evergreen was a big one as well. It was a pretty good start. It was a pretty healthy amount. I want to say 20 plus, 20-ish.
Kennedy,
programs.
Eagle Crest were both coming out pretty strong.
Yes.
Eagle Crest. Some programs having more than one team, mind you, because the interest was so high. I know Eagle Crest had at least 2. And
yes.
Did Chatfield have 2 or 3? They had.
I'm pretty sure Chatfield had more than 2. Because I was told that they had 100 athletes sign up on the first day. The first day. Do you want to react to that?
So, I mean, it's the interest is there, is the simple takeaway from it, especially if they know that it's an opportunity. Because, I mean, look, not everyone's going to be in a fall sport, but, they do play sports in the spring or in the winter, and this just gives them one more opportunity to, get in shape and have fun. I mean, oh my God, it looked like so much fun out there, and it was so fun to cover. And, even if it in its infancy, it was very entertaining back and forth and just very explosive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, well, Kodey, I just want to ask you, what do you think, how important do you think it is that they started in the Denver metro area and, they had some of these big powerhouse programs, have a team and whatnot represent themselves this first season? How big was that in your opinion?
I honestly think that, we're excited to see some of these smaller schools from out east and up north get involved. But I think that there's kind of no other way to start it. And, I feel like it makes teams want to beat these other teams. I mean, Creek is like the biggest example of the school that every other school loves to hate, no matter if it's volleyball, basketball, football, what have you, right? And so, a lot of schools that, especially like Evergreen, who gets a chance to compete against a Cherry Creek in this setting, a lot of these schools are just excited to have a chance to beat Creek, right? And, getting those kind of like targets going and playing off of like rivalries that already exist in schools, I think was really huge. And yeah, I think it was just really exciting to, have a lot of familiar faces. And, I had a long conversation with like the AD of Denver South, I want to say, at like that end of season tournament. And he's talking about like, yeah, she plays basketball in the spring. Yeah, she's like one of our biggest track stars. And so like you have people from those teams coming out to support, from the track and field team. And, at a school that is that big, that has like fan sections and stuff, I think that that's a great way to go and a great way to start. Obviously, I like kind of wish that my alma mater was in on it, but I think that it's a great way to start, and you can get those other kind of like neighboring school districts. Like Littleton Public Schools comes to mind, Douglas County Schools comes to mind as probably the next big targets as far as school districts to join these leagues. You know what I'm saying? And looking into things like that is just really exciting. Aurora Public Schools is right there too. So I think that, starting where you have like, you offer it at these schools that have these high populations, it's almost a guarantee that they're going to have a team. And, I think that looking at all the squads that I saw, they looked pretty healthy numbers-wise, including having like, obviously some players play both ways, but, there is an option to definitely platoon for a handful of these squads. And it wasn't like, I don't think I saw a single team with like 5 to like 7 people at the end of the year tournament where, they would just be running and gassed the entire time. You know what I mean? Like there is a healthy amount of subs, a healthy amount of playing time, and a lot of energy on the sidelines too. Like the buzz and, the pride for playing for your school and this new thing and having a chance to be the first ever crowned champ of this brand new sport. It meant a lot to these young women and to these high schoolers to play for that. And I think that, that school spirit here in the metro area is very strong. And, I think that it was a great place to start for it, for sure. What was it like at, that season, that week that you were able to go out to? Because I just want to get your perspective on, what the energy was like there, seeing all these different schools, and what that looked like kind of in the quote-unquote regular part of the season, since I only had the 1 week of experience with those schools in that setting.
Yeah, it was really different. I wish I could be more positive about it, but the energy just wasn't quite there. Obviously, the teams always brought the energy, and I would say the numbers, I would have to agree with you, the numbers were extremely healthy. There was not a single team that I saw this season, both in the regular season and postseason, that had numbers where I was like, that's a little concerning, and there are some college teams that I've covered that I have openly expressed concern about their numbers. It was nowhere near that. When it came to the regular season and postseason. At the one jamboree I went to, there were plenty of players there. And like you said, Cody, some teams had multiple teams as well. They had to. They had to, just so that players could realistically not even guarantee it, but potentially get playing time. So you can't have 40-person teams, so they'll be like, all right, well, let's go with 21 at most, because then you have 14 on the sideline or something like that. And so I was really happy with the numbers. The athletes were really into it, and I think something also to keep in mind is that athletes joined as the season went on. And I'm not going to give us too much credit here, but I think as they found out about the sport, and, we did cover that 1 week, and we kept saying it week by week on the podcast that, hey, girls flag football is a thing and whatnot, and we kept advertising anything that came our way about it. More players obviously joined as the season went on. Like I said, I'm not going to give us that much credit, but I am going to credit these programs for, hey, finding a way to get it done. And adding more athletes. And so I really loved the numbers and whatnot. But as far as it came to people supporting, I just don't think people knew about these games. To be just completely honest with you, outside of maybe some of the people in the Broncos organization, I know they did get FanView, right? Joe New and his company to record some things. So he obviously knew about some of the stuff going on there. But honestly, outside of maybe the individual programs, ADs, and the families of these players, and maybe some close friends, I just didn't really see a lot of people out there, which was really sad. And I think it's just a reflection of how bad I don't know, just how bad they are at advertising these jamborees, to be honest with you, because I had to go look at district calendars to confirm what times the jamborees were gonna be at, just in case, and even that was a hassle. It was clicking out at link after link after link after link. It was just so inaccessible. And so I wish I could say that the energy was big time there during the regular season, but it just wasn't. Sidelines though, they were always hyped, and sometimes that's what you gotta do. You gotta be your own cheerleaders and whatnot, and you gotta support each other, obviously, as a squad, and that was always really fun to see and whatnot. But I would also say that it was a lot more obvious which teams were better than others naturally and whatnot, because I feel like there were a lot of, and this isn't surprising at all, but there were definitely a ton of players just trying to figure it out. Just trying to figure out the game, still getting used to the rules, still getting used to the skill level and all that, because you could tell there were some great athletes, but maybe skill level wise they just weren't there. And so, it was definitely more of a learning experience in the regular season for a lot of these teams, and they continue to be this first year as it was the first year. So I'm gonna give all of them some slack and whatnot, but I think it was just a lot easier to potentially get discouraged because maybe there were times where it felt like the skill gap was a lot bigger than, or I guess skill/talent gap was a lot bigger than it actually was. Does that make sense, Cody?
No, yeah, and I mean, I feel like athleticism was just like a huge part of it. Like, I feel like people who had participated in other sports probably had, an edge, obviously, and or, there are, when you're younger, I'd say that that's probably the most opportunity that girls have had to this point of playing football is mostly in younger settings. So if they played flag when they were like growing up, even just a little bit, or even a little bit of tackle, and like, I'm blanking on the name of the specific youth league, but like, playing like youth tackle football or something, that would give you like a little bit of advantage. And I think that, when you see those really good players or those really skilled players, in that setting, it can definitely be a little intimidating. But, I think that it's just one of those things where you have to trust the process. And, maybe some of these schools didn't get to play other schools where, they were a little bit more even keeled as far as being new to sport or football, maybe. As far as just opportunity of like really getting a proper measuring test, I'd say. But, to any of those players, I do just want to say, hey, come out again next year. As long as you, weren't a senior, obviously, you should definitely come out again in the fall and, just trust the process in that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no, like, girls flag football league in Colorado. There's just not. You have to play with boys, and so it's definitely going to be different. And unlike places, well, really just unlike Florida, who's had it since like 1998, early 2000s, there's not going to be girls I grew up with playing football, because they didn't have that opportunity before. So there's definitely a lot of grace given there. I don't blame them. But honestly, I was just really happy to see really healthy numbers. I think this first year, if anything, it would have been a red flag if there were some bare-bone teams and teams already struggling to put out players. I don't think any squad really struggled to put out players, like I said. And so that is a major green flag, and absolutely love to see that. And, let's just go ahead and talk about that day where we went and we covered basically the first ever tournament/playoffs. It's not technically a playoffs yet because of CHASA and whatnot, but it was the first tournament, and so it's not going to be
like
documented.
The state tournament or whatever, I guess.
Yeah, it was the first state tournament, and so it's not going to be documented anywhere. At least I haven't seen it documented really anywhere, like official. But we covered it, and so we're always going to know that the first ever state champions were Chatfield. Sorry, spoiler alert, but go ahead and check out episode 207 to go ahead and listen to that whole recap, because
someone was ready for that.
Yeah, no, I was ready for that. But we recapped the whole tournament, Cody. You and I literally split up. We covered every single game. There was the whole fiasco with the charger and not being able to post on social media for a little bit. But what matters is that we got notes for pretty much
we don't talk
every
about the
single
charger
game.
Incident of 2022. But I remember editing that episode when I was dog sitting, so yeah.
Yes, that's not going to happen again. But we took notes on basically every single game. Obviously, some games were closer than others, especially at the beginning. But it got more competitive as it went on, and it was just really fun. I mean, the energy was great. I think, honestly, just being in the same building and the two fields being next to each other and people coming in and out was a good thing, because everyone knew
a lot of buzz.
Oh yeah, like everyone knew what was going down, what the bracket looked like, and teams were watching each other and supporting each other, which was huge. And I think everyone knew that they were the best of the best, because how it worked was that they had district tournaments before, and then I think the top 4 teams in those districts all made it to state, right, Cody?
Yeah, it was something to that degree. Like they came in knowing who won the district tournaments at least. And so there were like definitely favorites heading into this week.
That also affected seeding as well, by the way. So there you go. But yeah, no. And so it was just a really good time. Great energy. I also want to shout out, because she showed up, and this was probably on us. Like I said, we're covering like football in the fall too, and there's like almost no way for us to like prepare for this because we got the information so late, unfortunately. But a college head coach actually came out, and it was first year Kansas Wesleyan head coach Melinda Wynn. Shout out to her. Got to meet her, talk to her. I saw her in her KWU gear like once we walked in, and I was like, oh, I know who she is. And we literally saw like the press conference post, whatever, about her being announced as the next flag coach just a couple weeks prior. So I already knew what she looked like. And so shout out to her. She is friends with the Arvada West head coach. And so that was pretty big for her to come out and recruit. Obviously, like in hindsight, we should have messaged all the programs and been like, or coaches, and been like, hey, just so you know, this is when the state tournament was, but we only knew about it maybe 2 or 3 weeks prior, which was really inconvenient, like I said. But if we knew about this before, we could have shouted out all the coaches or sent them all a message probably in August, because we do have those connections, because we do cover NAIA women's flag football. But regardless, it was just big for her to be there. We did what we could, pointing out teams and specific players and whatnot. And I guess the only thing that could be improved is them adding rosters, because to this day, we are not, we like don't know most of the players that did participate in this.
Number 22, number 31, number 6. That was the extent of coverage, unless I specifically overheard someone cheering someone else's name who like had the ball. And just use context clues or very minimal conversations with coaches in passing, more or less.
Yeah, we had to get really active. And it's just me and Kodey here. Gideon wasn't at this thing. He couldn't make it. So it's a lot to keep in mind. And like I said, we did our best. Check out that episode. We shouted out those athletes and their number. Hopefully those athletes have listened to it. I know some have, because they have commented on our TikToks or messaged us, which we really appreciate their support, obviously. But they'll always know what number they were. And I think that's what matters, just being like, hey, this player made this play, And so hopefully they eventually come around to it and are able to listen to that episode, which is up on YouTube and everywhere you can listen to podcasts, obviously. And so that's just a big part in documenting this whole thing, which is another critique. But other than that, it was just good energy. Loved seeing all the teams play. I am going to shout out a couple of teams, and then Kodey, I'll let you shout out some teams as well. But really loved watching Evergreen play. They knew what they were doing, which I think went a long way. They had some great athletes. They did a good job. They were a very complete team, and I'm very high on them going into next year. So there you go. Arvada West was another team that I got to see in the regular season, and I was very, very excited for them. I said they were my favorite to win it all, and they did get to the championship, so there you go. Just extremely well coached. Obviously have one of the best coaches in the entire state. I truly believe that. And all the players, they were really coming into their own. I wouldn't say they were the most athletic team, but they just outplayed some squads football-wise and skill-wise, and so they were a great team just to look at. Obviously, there's Chatfield, but Kodey, I'll let you talk about them a little bit more. And then Eagle Crest as well was another team that I really, really liked. But Kodey, what were some teams that really stood out to you in this tournament? What were some programs that really stood out?
Well, I think, it goes almost without saying, but Cherry Creek had a solid squad, in flag football, just as they do in basically every other sport. So, I think that they were fun to watch, and a team that I wanted to get eyes on. But Kennedy was another school that definitely impressed me, and I think that it's another thing about flag football too is like there's a lot of different ways to be good at it. I mean, just like regular football too, but it's not just whoever's the biggest, fastest, meanest out there. Sometimes it's, hey, this one girl on Kennedy, her footwork was absolutely absurd, and she just did a great job of doing, flag evasions without flag guarding and stuff like that. So, that impressed me, and they were able to make some noise. And, the Denver South versus Chatfield game is one of the craziest games I saw in the Colorado high school football season, tackle or flag. I could not keep up with the action, and I was exhausted trying to keep up with it. I mean, it was seriously just like big splash play after big splash play, pick six after pick six, and I mean, it was like no touchdown was like under 10 yards. They were all like on the other side of the field whenever they were making these huge plays, and both teams just had absurd athletes and, quarterbacks capable of making the plays, or, just great athleticism as far as jukes and, getting into the open field and taking off. I mean, it was literally a track meet. There were so many points scored, and it was so back and forth and very, very intense, very exciting, and very loud over on those sidelines, for those teams that had made it so late into the day for the tournament as well. And I think, as the day went on, more and more people were able to show up and cheer on. So, those teams, by the end, I mean, for that final game, Simon, those sidelines were very crowded by that point. I feel like...
Well, we weren't on the sidelines at that point because it was hard to get shots.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying is earlier in the day, we had a lot of freedom as far as moving around and getting good shots and kind of just being able to manipulate, the sidelines and the end zones. But by that final game, we were kind of stuck on one side of the field or the other, long ways, that is, and north-south, as one might say. So, that's a good thing, though. Like, we'd rather those sidelines be full and have to kind of approach it a little differently on our end. For the trade-off, the energy was just absurd for that final championship game. So, but like Simon said, definitely listen to that full reaction of the whole tournament on that episode. 207, you said?
It's 207.
Wow. Great memory for a guy with CTE. But, I think that obviously there's a lot that day is the most to be happy about and excited looking forward to, as far as the energy that was created and, the playing conditions. And, I thought the officials were okay. I wouldn't say like no better or worse than any other officiating crew on any other day or night of football. Honestly, officials sometimes make calls and sometimes they don't. Like, no officiating ruined a game, I would say, from what I could really remember. So, I think that there's a lot to be happy about because of that day. And I think that if they can replicate that and announce that and spread the wealth of that, there's a lot to be excited for moving forward. But
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the energy, not just in the championship games, but in the games leading up, were like absolutely insane. Like when Arvada West beat Evergreen, that was a pretty intense game. Like, it was pretty intense in general, and there were definitely some words exchanged, which is part of the game. But hey, that was intense, and when they took that knee, oh my God, like they were excited for this. Same with Chatfield, and when Chatfield played Arvada West, like golly, man, that game. Like, it was just one of those games where you could legitimately feel that every play mattered. You couldn't have a bad play. You just couldn't, because that's how close this game was. Because it was a very competitive game. I would say for sure. It was extremely competitive between those two squads, and it really could have went either way. I mean, Arvada West, they had the ball with seconds left, and unfortunately, Chatfield just got a goal line stand. They stopped that receiver on that post route right before she could reach over. So she was maybe like less than a foot off from potentially winning Arvada West the state championship, which is heartbreaking for sure. But for Chatfield, that was huge for them to get that poll right before she could extend, and so that was hype. I mean, this entire thing was hype. If I do remember correctly, Chatfield, I want to say, had their homecoming or some sort of dance, like either before or after. It had to be after because it was kind of later at night, but you saw some Chatfield students who were like still kind of dressed in their homecoming stuff. Either they were coming from that or they were about to go to it right after, that stayed and watched this championship game and stormed the field when they won it all, which was absolutely insane. And we have videos of those, and I had chills just seeing it. And it was great. Chatfield was extremely deserving. They played a heck of a game. A lot of great football players over there, and they just continued that tradition and also became the first school ever in Colorado history to win both a boys state championship in football and a girls state championship, which I am going to count this one, even though Chassa won't. So,
well, they were at the Bronco game that we went
yes.
to. They got recognized at that Bronco game. So,
that was the highlight of that game outside of JJ Watt. But yeah, I'm just saying.
That was a rough game. It was the Cardinals game. They recognized but they recognized state champion, 6-man, 8-man, 1A through 5A, and they recognized the girls flag football state champs, which was Chatfield, and that was really awesome to, they at least, I will say the Broncos at least got that right there. Granted, they did make all those state champs sit through that game, but, it's all good, because, they were there and they got the shout out, and, I think that was really rewarding for us, I'd say. I don't know if this counts as part of the reaction to this first season, but I thought that was sweet.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. And geez, I realize this is the first segment it took it like a whole hour, but we never really got a chance to like review that, and talk about that, because that was honestly one of the best parts of the entire 2022 football season, just being able to witness history like that. And I think the main takeaways from this was that, hey, let's start with the positives. Numbers were healthy. Teams were so healthy with the numbers that they had to make 2, 3, 4 different squads for one school, and this was year one. And so they actually exceeded how many programs we expected in the first season, and there's still room to grow, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So that's basically number one. Numbers were healthy. Number two, when it came down to postseason, the energy was there. There were good numbers there were pretty healthy numbers of people, fans and whatnot, coming in and watching and supporting. That was great, and just an excellent postseason altogether. I'll shout out the Broncos on that one for putting it together. I would say that they could pick a different venue with more seats though, which was maybe something they weren't expecting, but that was definitely an issue. There were some spacing issues for sure, I would say, which is a good thing. So like I said, numbers were really good as far as fans went.
Players there, which was pretty cool to see. Honestly,
yes.
Wasn't Mike Purcell was definitely there. He's
Mike
pretty
was
hard
there
to miss. And
Josh Johnson, wasn't he there before? It's funny because he played for a different team, or he started for a different team later on in that season.
Yeah,
but wasn't
I want to
he
say
there?
Josh Johnson was there, and I feel like Justin Simmons was there because I feel like he's at every community thing for the Broncos. I might be tripping, but
no, he was there. Yeah, Justin Simmons.
Yeah,
was
he's
there.
at every community thing. He's awesome,
Yeah,
but
he was a popular guy there.
Yeah, that's probably why, because we didn't get close enough to Justin Simmons because he was popular. But and a certain Stanley winner was there. Not going to disclose what squad.
Stanley Cup winner.
Yeah, Stanley Cup winner. I saw you. He saw me, but I had to play it cool. Did it for the sport. Just because. But anyways,
wait, you don't want to shout him out? You can shout him out.
I saw Jared Bednar at this championship thing, and we made eye contact, and I was like, oh my god. My eyes said, oh my god, that's Jared Bednar, and his eyes were like, no, I'm not here. And I was like, I So I had to play it cool to not blow his cover because he was definitely trying to be incognito. But I know it was Jared Bednar because his eyes were like, "Hey, bro, I'm just trying to watch my daughter play," and I wanted to approach him later, but I don't think this is a spoiler. She didn't play for Chatfield, so her team did not win, so there wasn't really a good time for that. But anyways, hopefully
we're not revealing any personal information there. That's what matters.
Yeah, that's what matters. But amen. Amen. Hopefully I see him around again. I'm gonna bug him about an autograph next time. But anyways, I just want to say that overall very successful postseason tournament. Like Simon said, more seating would have been nice, but I think that it is a live and learn, and I do think it was cool for them to play in the Broncos facility. Like, I can respect that, but there's an outside portion of it too, and maybe there's ways to accommodate, or maybe move the bleacher, get more bleachers kind of going across. I'm not sure, but that's up to events. They run that. I'm in that business. I get the logistics part. It can be hard to plan out sometimes, but very happy with how that went. Simon, is there more that we need to add on to this first season before kind of discussing other things that we noticed or specific topics? I mean, we kind of have addressed some of these, but I think that there are some areas of improvement is probably what I'm alluding to.
Yeah, there's definitely areas of improvement because it was just year one, so obviously that's going to be a pretty big gap there. I am going to say, if the Denver Broncos are listening to this, you could hire us and we would probably, we'd pretty much do it for free. So you'll go ahead and organize all of that stuff. That's how passionate we are about it, but also we are pretty busy. So don't, ask us to organize it 2 weeks before it starts. Like last season. So yeah, but anyways, let's talk about some things that could be improved moving forward here. And yeah, let's just talk about coaching. So number one, coaching. Look, I'm gonna give a lot of these coaches a lot of grace because it's not easy hopping into this thing, and recruiting is something, a team figuring out like who is gonna play what position, because I think that was definitely something that I could tell was a big deal, and then obviously teaching the game for the most part, because there's really, like, I couldn't imagine there were any programs or teams that had more than 2 or 3 players that played football before, and had that experience. And it's different between knowing and watching and all that stuff and playing. I'm sure there were definitely some players who understood how football works and have watched it before, but there's a difference when you're playing it for sure. And so that's a tall task right there. And then, figuring out how the rules work and working with the field, because it is a little bit smaller and whatnot, compared to other women's, flag football, I guess, games around the country and whatnot. So there you go. So there's just a lot to figure out there. And then scheme as well. And obviously you have the whole underlying thing with players and chemistry, which players had best chemistry with each other and what works the most, and so a lot going on for sure. And then obviously you're building your brand as well, as it is a first year, it is a first year sport and a first year program. So there's definitely a lot piled on for these coaches, and I have a lot of respect for them to, do what they did with this. With that being said, though, I don't know. Maybe it's just really hard. It's definitely really hard to go from watching college women's flag football and seeing some of the best coaches in the entire country do this thing. Shout out the Sauer sisters, Chelsea Palmer, but a lot of, coaches, right? It's hard to go from that to the high school level and just being man, I don't know why we're running it so much. I don't know why nobody is attempting any double passes. I don't know why it's just man-to-man, person-to-person defense, but there's no safety for some reason. So, it's, there's that. There's a lot of like, I don't know about this. And here's where I'm coming from. Look, obviously, if you're a coach listening to this, you might take offense to it. Okay, that's fine. I feel like I could definitely coach better than some of the coaches. And like I said, I know it's a lot going on, and I'm just going to throw this out there, and I don't know my future because right now we're recording this April 10th, 2023, so who knows, maybe, a month from now I'm at a school, and I am looking to get back into teaching, so there's that, but also coaching potentially as well. And I'm just going to be honest, like, I would definitely coach a women's flag football program, be a head coach, run all of it, and I feel like I could do as good a job, if not better, than some of these other coaches. And, I don't know how much time some of these schools gave their teams, but it was very apparent that it wasn't a lot, or at least you hope it wasn't a lot because of the level that some of these teams were just at. And like I said, it's a tall order. It's a lot. I am definitely talking a lot from the sidelines here, but also, I am open to coaching a program and building a program for sure. That is something that I would for sure do, and even put the podcast aside momentarily to do, to make sure that thing goes right, because that's how important this thing is, coaching is, to the sport for sure. Now, Kodey, I do want to ask you, what are your thoughts about the coaching here so far? I mean, obviously it has to be held at a higher standard than what we saw last season, but as it was the first season, so there you go. But what are your thoughts, Kodey? I want to hear what you felt about it, because it's not like you only saw one game. You saw a ton of games, even if it was just that one day.
Yeah, so from what I could kind of tell of the coaching, I feel like for a handful of these coaches, it was their first time coaching flag football, if not all of them, right, to at least to this extent, definitely the first time. And, I think that a lot of them kind of had to answer the call, especially at schools with really big teams. And something else that, I think kind of plays a role into this is the fact that it is happening concurrently with the tackle football season, right? Just because then you don't have, coaches that can coach both seasons. It's just too tall of an order, right? And so I feel like a lot of the coaches that were successful had prior coaching experience, whether it was in tackle or flag football, and they had like pedigree to their they had a reputation, they had prior success, and maybe some of the coaches that struggled didn't necessarily have that. They kind of stepped up, volunteered, did the best that they could to, make the most out of these opportunities for those athletes. And I appreciate that. And I shout that, and, I respect it a lot. But there definitely needs to be some growth. There needs to be some improvement. I think just like we talked about in our tackle coaching episode, there has to be, clinics and ways to improve and focus, and, following us in the spring and listening to these recaps Coach V's got going on, and paying attention to, the live coverage that I'll be able to provide of the nationals and stuff. I think that's going to be a really big time. But it is something to, keep in mind, is to just improve and find different ways to improve and find ways to watch these games to really give these young athletes the most that you can, right? Because they're giving you everything they can. It's only fair that you give them everything you can. And a lot of these coaches I feel were, but didn't really know what to do with it. So, I think that there's obviously a lot of room for improvement. I think that a pretty safe bet that, a lot of these coaches kind of leaned on, and, I get it, right? I mean, that you do this in any sport, any team sport, and, you see it in tackle too, but you could definitely tell which ones were asking a lot out of one specific player. They had them running the quarterback, they had them running routes, they were handing them handoffs, they were typically the safety on defense as well. And, for teams that were able to win in the first round, that's great. Then it's a little bit harder in the second round, and it's not sustainable through the third round, right? And, you could point that at, you could point that out as far as like maybe a depth thing, but not really. It's just finding the strengths of those other players and playing to them and designing the playbook in a way to do that. But, you know, I think that for the first, it looked like the first season of flag football. I think it's the best way to describe the coaching. And, you know, I'm watching the reads that some of these quarterbacks are making, and I'm just, oh, what are you doing? Why are you looking at one route the entire time? And you could tell that it's like, all right, just, there is one game. I want to say it was Denver East and Eagle Crest, like Eagle Crest Red or Eagle Crest Black, something like that. One of their squads. And literally it was like they were just throwing as far as they could, and then it was an interception. And then the other team would get it and throw it as far as they could, and it was an interception. It was just interception, back and forth. And so watching that kind of made me want to rip my hair out a little bit. Because I was like, what are they telling these girls to do out here? Like, what is this? And they're like, just hawk it. Like, what? I shouldn't laugh. That's really disrespectful. But I was too stunned to speak. It was definitely one of the most, like, cartoony things I've ever seen. And so I think that, you know, designing concepts and something is something that has to be studied by some of these coaches. And, you know, I think if the Broncos really, really care, they should host coaching clinics, and they should bring in flag football coaches to talk about this and talk strategies and invite these schools to it. I think that is something that if the Broncos are really serious about investing into girls sports and girls flag football, I don't think that's a huge sacrifice for them to make or set up.
I am going to say I know what game you're talking about because I posted the highlights of that on TikTok and YouTube Shorts, and both quarterbacks were getting flamed pretty badly. I'm just going to be honest with you. And it wasn't like it was just men, you know. It was women too. So, you know, that's how bad it was.
And that's like totally a coaching thing. Like, you can't, if they're making that mistake over and over again, you got to tell them not to do that, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think something that's really noticeable is that a lot of these coaches don't know how to call a quick game. So that's definitely an issue because that is key to flag football. That is arguably like, I would say that's arguably the foundation of your play calling. Because just in general, running teams don't usually do well. That's just how it goes. And if they do, there's definitely a cap on it, just like in real life. And so, or not in real life, but like in men's football as well. Shout out Columbine. So there's that just to keep in mind. And so I'm going to assume it gets better, right? Obviously, there's going to be stability. You're going to get players back. You're going to know what you have. You know, you're probably going to roll with what you know first. And then, you know, you're going to continue to get better. You know, I think some coaches definitely went into this with the mindset of like, hey, let's just figure out who we want to play, right? And then we'll just kind of figure it out on the fly. And that's cool. You know, that's great. Next year, though, I guarantee you there's going to be 3 or 4 teams that are going to be like, hey, it really sucked getting 6 touchdowns scored on us, or it really sucked losing 6-0 5 times, and we're not going to let that happen. Let's script out the first 3 drives, you know. Yeah, and then you know, you're going to see some teams buzzsaw other teams, naturally. That's just what's going to happen. I could already see it. And so we'll definitely see what happens moving forward. It's not super concerning right now. I do agree that, you know, hopefully there are some clinics here in Colorado specifically for girls high school flag football. I think that would really raise the level, you know. Shout out to some of the college coaches that, you know, maybe want to come to Colorado and do that. I would definitely sit in on that just so I could increase my personal knowledge. But, you know, let's just see what happens for sure. But that's definitely something that comes to mind as something that I'm like, it's got to be better, you know, because it's kind of the same. It's definitely the same deal with, you know, coaching on the high school level for boys, which, you know, check out that episode if it just dropped. I don't know what order these are going to be dropping in. But it's definitely something that is similar to that where, if you run a basic scheme and all that stuff, it really limits how useful a player could be on the next level, especially for an emerging sport like this where the majority of players are going to be out of Florida and teams will openly go ahead and recruit every Florida player, because we all know how big of an edge that is. They'd rather do that than teach somebody hey, this is how this game works and whatnot. And that's something that I also heard on an interview with head coach Jeff Molesky. I mean, it's just easier to be working with players who already know the game, who grew up with the game and whatnot. And so that's kind of where Colorado's at right now. None of these athletes we have grew up with it. They're all learning it right now. And so it's very vital for us to have good coaches. But
what
Kodey,
do you think of my statement of how much of a role do you think the Broncos have responsibility-wise in attempting to develop coaches of flag football?
I'm going to ask you this question right now, but do they hold any clinics for high school coaches?
Uh-oh.
Like men's?
That's bad if I can't give you an answer right now that's a yes. But, okay, to be fair, the Broncos aren't explicitly, sponsoring and trying to pilot. Obviously, boys tackle football is in a different spot, right? But they are trying to pilot and kickstart and host this girls' flag football program, is why I think that they hold some responsibility or should attempt to develop some of these coaches in a program that, they have taken a lot of credit for starting, I think, is where I'm coming from on that. And they have the resources to do that as well.
Well, currently as it stands, I view the Denver Broncos as the governing body of women's high school flag football here in Colorado. Not CHSAA, because it's not a CHSAA sport yet. I know CHSAA, they say it's in their pilot program and whatnot, but to be honest with you, from the way I see things and from the response, or I guess lack of response we got from CHSAA, they really have no control over this thing, or really doesn't seem like they have a lot of control over this thing. And so I definitely view the Broncos as the governing org for women's high school flag football. And so, yeah, absolutely, it is the responsibility to make sure they have competent coaches. That's plain and simple. This is your league, ain't it? So you got to figure it out. And that's not that's not a us problem, that's a you problem. And so figure it out. It's not that hard. You see what the Tampa Bay Bucks are doing, Jacksonville Jaguars are doing. Obviously, they're down in Florida, so they have that advantage. But, I mean, you can also look out east as well, northeast, that is, at the New York Giants and what they've done. The Philadelphia Eagles have done some good things. The Pittsburgh Steelers have done some good things. I mean, what more do you want? Maybe you need to also assign somebody the job of head of football development, or whatever the Chargers have, because that's what the Chargers have. And by the way, they're in your division. Shout out, one of my old contacts, Angelica Grayson, great person who took on that job and is helping develop football out in California for girls and women and all that great stuff. So there you go. Maybe they need to do that, honestly, because that would obviously go a long way in helping develop this sport. But yeah, no, absolutely. Coaches, I mean, they deserve to have a clinic, and I think it is the Broncos' responsibility since they are the governing body. But as we wrap this thing up about coaching, I mean, what do you think about that, Kodey? And do you have any final words about the coaching here for women's high school flag football?
Yeah, I think that, like we've definitely alluded to, there's a ton of room to grow. We're obviously, grateful for the people who did step up and were kind of thrust into this role with very minimal resources. But I think it's absolutely fair to see the kind of coaching that is and the kind of resources being provided by other teams around the league, and to match that energy and to grow this sport. I don't think we're asking for that much, as advocates of the sport. And I don't think that, for these athletes, I don't think that it's asking too much either to strengthen those opportunities. And, I think that for coach, gosh, you really hope that, you see how much fun the girls are having throwing the football, and you hope that that translates to the tackle side of things. Really, you do. And I think that that is part of what will have to happen for Colorado football as a whole to take a step forward. So the sooner that girls flag football can take that step and get that coaching and develop these awesome passing games on a more unilateral level, then the better for obviously girls and in general. Look, this is the culture series for Colorado football as a whole. So I think that, it's also a testament to all of Colorado football should, girls flag football coaching take that step forward. It's good for the whole state.
For sure. And speaking of the whole state, Kodey, how should I phrase this? What programs / schools or areas would you want girls high school football to be at, in Colorado? What are some areas? Where's the next spot you want girls high school flag football to be at in this next second season? Ideally, right? Because obviously we have no information and we probably won't get any until maybe September, to be honest with you, because that's the precedent that has been set.
Sheesh.
But,
True,
what's
true.
the next spot? Where's the next place that you'd like to see have a couple girls high school flag football programs pop up?
Well, call me biased, but obviously my alma mater, I think that I'd love to see a girls flag football program at Arapahoe High School. And I know, when I was going there were a ton of girls in my class, actually, that really helped pilot and push girls field hockey to where it is today and getting a team for Arapahoe. And so, I think that, there can be that same energy definitely matched for girls flag football. And, as somebody who took, football-centric classes in gym class, there were plenty of great female athletes, out there just scoring TDs and throwing TDs. And, I think that that can be replicated for the Warriors, so that's from a personal standpoint. And then, I think that while you're in there, loop Heritage into it. I think that they are pretty, I'd say they take pride in their athletics. And so I think that, if Arapahoe's doing it, then Heritage will definitely want to do it, definitely want to compete in there. Littleton High School, I'd love to have them in the fold as well. I don't know if they'll be as easy to target, but I definitely think Douglas County is another place you look with strong athletic programs such as Ponderosa, Legend. And I'm not just talking football programs, I just mean strong athletics in general too, especially if schools have a strong football program and strong girls athletic programs. I think those are great places to start, like basketball programs and stuff like that. So, Douglas County, I think, is a great place to go. And I think that Grandview is, a team that, is constantly competing in, girls basketball and stuff. And so getting some of them out to the gridiron, I think, could be very exciting for, flag football in the future there. And then from there, from, the metro area, obviously you target your Dougco, your APS, and your LPS, and those kind of areas. And you kind of creep into that North Denver kind of area, too, I think. You start to look at Broomfield, look at Westminster as far as expanding beyond that. And you just look at schools with strong football programs, with strong support too. And, I'm thinking of Eaton. Simon, I know that you and I see eye to eye on this, that Eaton is probably more than capable of fielding a very strong girls flag football program. So, you look at that. Roosevelt is a team that has, obviously a rich football tradition. They're a team that supports their girls basketball team very strong. Holy Family is a solid football program that has solid girls sports as well. So, I look at these programs that have a little bit of that overlap that are probably chomping at the bit to get involved in this for, programs at least on the high school level to get involved and to grow that. Coach V, I don't know, I could be making things up, But seeing as how I work in, growing sport programs and stuff like that, I don't think that's too bad of an approach. What is kind of your reaction to that approach? Obviously, outside of my personal bias. And what other things are you looking to add? I mean, you're down in the Springs. I know that football is, big at some programs. Do you see growth for, girls high school flag football in the Springs and what the path to that might look like?
Well, before I talk about that, I do want to talk about what you just had to say there and react to all that, because I definitely agree. I think the key, if we just go by cities, right? Cities and areas, the key cities and areas where you absolutely have to have a girls high school flag football program at this, or I guess in this going into this next season, would absolutely have to be Aurora. So you have to get all the teams from there. That includes Grandview. If you could get Regis Jesuit to do it, that would be huge as well. We all know that they can. So let's just put any reason why they can't do that aside. They definitely could if they wanted to. They're a private school. So there you go. Aurora for sure. You got to lock that down. That's a hotbed for talent, not just for football, but for all sports. We literally have 5-star basketball players coming out of Aurora, women's basketball players coming out of Aurora like all the time. So that's how important like that area is to lock down with multiple programs, because multiple programs means multiple opportunities in my eyes and in my head. So there you go. And then next up, I would say for sure has to be Littleton and Highlands Ranch. I think Highlands Ranch is extremely important. I definitely could see Thunder Ridge, Mountain Vista, Valor for sure, Rock Canyon getting into it, and having some pretty deep rivalries with each other. Because if you look at their women's athletics and whatnot, they go back and forth, and there's some pretty dominant programs all over the state as well, comparatively, when just looking at straight athletic talent. And so I think that's a big one for sure. Littleton, you already talked about that one. And then this is a little bit farther south, and maybe not this year, but hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years. Parker is for sure one that you absolutely have to establish a couple programs in. I'm looking at Legend, Pondo, and Lutheran as those main squads. No disrespect to Chap and some of the other schools out there, but I think those three absolutely have to pioneer it, or one of them have to pioneer it. So I think that's kind of where I'm looking at here in the short term, in the next 2 years. I think in 2 years, if we got Highlands Ranch, Aurora, and Parker locked up, Littleton as well, that's really good. That's a really good spot to be in. A lot of talent there. We also know a lot of trainers in that area as well, who we already know for a fact would be willing to train some, girls flag football players, female athletes, and all that great stuff. So that'd be pretty big time as well. So there you go.
Your point also kind of reminded me, I think that bringing, if you can bring rivalries in to this, it's only going to be better for the sport growing. Just thinking about if you can bring Legend and Pondo in at the same time, that would be huge. You know what I mean? As far as these schools that have rivalries between them, so that way you get these girls flag football games that are packed, and you do get a lot of coverage on it through the fans and market it in that kind of way, one more avenue of rivalry. I think that's a good approach too. Sorry, I just wanted to interject because you kind of sparked that thought.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that'd be the easiest way to go about it. Also, having private schools pick it up, like Valor, Regis would also be huge, because that they have the money to spare to go ahead and pump in a lot into those programs, and they have excellent athletes out there as well. Now, whether they're going to do it, because, ethics could always be brought into this one when talking about both those programs, but I'm just throwing that out there, because it's known. But whether they do it or not is up to them, obviously, but it'd be huge if they could, because you can't tell me that nobody would love to drop 50 on Valor or Regis. You just can't. So there's definitely that as well. Also, as a quick side note too, I would definitely love to see some smaller schools and programs join from those areas. Devlin is one that comes to mind right away. I would love to see them have a program, for sure. G-Dub is another. I don't know if they had one this year. I might have to look back at it.
I think they did.
Are you sure? I don't think they did. I don't think they did. But I could be wrong.
We'll double back. We'll double back.
Strasburg and Bennett aren't that far out. And so, even if you're a smaller school that like doesn't have like a football team, you could still field a squad. You could definitely still field a squad, because I know there are some all-women's high schools, private schools up in that Denver area as well. And so I would really love to see schools that don't have like a boys football program go ahead and field a squad to put out there. So there you go there. Oh, Kent Denver is one that absolutely has to join. That'd be huge as well, because I know they have money.
Yes, Kent Denver can, and resources. For sure. And G-Dub, they're listed here, so...
Okay.
But, obviously, if we didn't see schools at the, 2 weeks that we were there, how are we supposed to know? So, just gonna put that out there, food for thought for listeners. But anyways, sorry to cut you off. Please continue.
No, yeah, it's all good. But yeah, I think at bare minimum, if you're going to go Denver, you got to go Denver, in depth, right? It can't just be the big schools. So I definitely expect some of the smaller private schools to join. Because at the end of the day, you need you definitely need at least 7 players, right? To play, and a coach, and a field. Pretty much Nike will provide you with your uniforms and the equipment as well. So that's not even a big deal. You just got to apply for the grant, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken there. So there's opportunities for those schools to come in. And so hopefully more of them join, because I think it would be almost a culture changer if some of these programs, if some of these smaller private schools say, hey, we don't have a boys football program, but we have a girls football program that we are extremely proud of. And that could really change the dynamic of things moving forward in this state. Who runs football and all that stuff. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm not going to go too much more in depth than that. Oh, also Mullen as well. They should have a program, but we'll see. So there you go. Now, as far as the Springs goes, there's a lot of interest, and I know that because I'm out here and I work for the city. Specifically, I help run their sports leagues and whatnot, which includes football. And, there are a lot of people that knows that I do this podcast, literally did today. Just got recognized, not because of how I look, but because he recognized my voice, which is crazy. It's crazy. But shout out my guy, Bruce. And so I have connections here in the Springs, Fountain, Pueblo as well. And there's a lot of interest for sure. There was definitely, I'm going to just put out this vibe, but there was definitely a feeling of envy that the Broncos were only focusing on Denver schools. And there was definitely, there were some hard feelings for sure. There were definitely some hard feelings. There were coaches that were asking how come nobody approached us about us joining or, making a women's football program, because we know plenty of athletes that would love to join. There were coaches that were mad about that. There were definitely a lot of adults that were mad about it. Parents for sure. A lot of female athletes for sure. And so I feel like there was definitely a lot of people that were secretly, I don't know if it's secretly because I'm kind of airing it out here, but it was kind of known oh, so the Broncos only care about Denver, huh? So the Springs is kind of whatever again, huh? And so that's the vibe right now. But there's definitely a lot of interest. Now, whether that is acted upon or not here in the next couple of years, we'll just have to see. Because here's the thing. Nobody from the Springs wants to drive up to Denver 4 out of 5, weeks in a season to go play other squads. That's not it. It's just not. No matter how good those squads are, that's just not it. And so I think the best case for the Springs and for the South is for there to be multiple programs out here that are bought in. And so I'm talking whole school districts, all of D11, all of D20. It can't just be 2 or 3. Like, you have to have at least 5 or 6 from each school district, which is asking a lot because that is pretty much the majority, and it leaves the margin of error very, very small out here, but that's just kind of where we're at, and so I think for this sport to grow truly in this state and for it to really take off, you can't do it without the Springs and without the South. You just can't. As much as Denver, and this isn't a shot to you, Cody, but as much as Denver people want to say, it all revolves around them and whatnot when it comes to sports and all that great stuff, sure, there's a lot of talent over there. There's also a pretty big population down south, and so you can't just take one half of the state. You got to provide opportunities for everyone, for sure.
One third of the state. Don't leave out no.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, but the southern half of the state weighs pretty heavily, though. We're talking about millions for sure. So, or I don't know, maybe I'd have to check that, but it's a pretty significant amount, and so you really, I just can't see this sport developing any farther if there aren't programs and leagues operated here in the Springs and in the South. But Cody, what do you think about all of that, what I just said there?
No, I think that those are great points, and I can see how they feel left out. And I definitely think that the infrastructure is there if, for getting these programs their due in flag. And I think it's important, right? We're talking Colorado football. Colorado is more than just Denver. And, like you said, people down south will be more than willing to tell you that. And, the people out east are willing to say that. And the people up north and the western slope, look, it's cool that Evergreen is out here doing their thing. But, there's a lot of schools on the other side of the Rockies that, I'm sure would like to play flag football, but definitely won't be driving 4.5 hours every weekend for a tournament, right? So I do think that, it was the place to start, but I do think that it is time to turn your attention. And, I think that it's one of those things where I'd love for the Broncos to invest into it because I don't know if Chas is necessarily going to market it and, utilize the infrastructure as wisely as the Broncos could potentially set it up to be, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's a classic. I mean, choosing between the Broncos, who obviously showed varying levels of competency through this opening season, and then choosing between them and Chassa, it's not the most promising set of choices as far as who to steer the ship. But, I really hope that the Broncos take the time to pump into it and to invest into it, especially because I just don't see Chassa really doing that, if that makes sense, for growing it stable.
It's also worth noting that the Olympic Training Center is in Colorado Springs as well, not Denver. And so if I'm just saying, if flag football gets picked up in the Olympics, as far as marketing goes and, building programs and connections and obviously money as well, if that's an issue, that's going to be huge when that comes around. And so honestly, I don't expect there to be a bunch of programs here even this next season or even the season after that, but by year 3 for sure. Sorry, I guess it would be year 4 technically, because this next year will be year 2 and then after that's year 3. But by year 4 of this whole thing, hopefully when this thing becomes official, there absolutely has to be not just one program, but a set of programs here in the Springs. And I mean, if I'm gonna also potentially call out some schools that I think could for sure do it. Fountain Fort Carson is one, Pine Creek for sure. Oh my God, Palmer Ridge, Lewis Palmer, Doherty easily. And then even some of the smaller programs, smaller schools, I mean, Colorado Springs Christian, Banning Lewis Academy, banning, or I just said Banning Lewis, I meant Manitou Springs. That's another one. I mean, Falcon. There's a lot of programs here that are gonna have to step up to the plate and basically make their own league down here if they don't want to play in Denver as well. But that's a lot to ask for. A bunch of programs to suddenly become self-sufficient and start themselves up. You're relying on a lot of different people to do that. And so we'll see, but there's definitely opportunities here if you can get women's flag football going. And then flag football does become an Olympic sport because you do have the Olympic Training Center right next to us. So, or not right next to us, but in the heart of the city, more like. So there you go. And there's plenty of fields. There's plenty of space, trust me. And to be honest with you, some of these teams, or some of these schools will probably benefit watching actual good football. So there's that too, for sure. That's a shot. I'm not pulling back on that. Yeah, it could be definitely a really big, breath of fresh air seeing women play football for sure, rather than some of the programs around here. I'll double down on that. But yeah, that's the future for sure. I think the Springs is vital. Northern Colorado is absolutely vital, but I think there's a much easier path up north than there is one down south. Does that make sense, Kodey?
Yeah, I mean, there's just less of a gap of quote-unquote nothingness, if that makes sense, heading north, especially Broomfield's really close. I mean, I feel like the next step past Parker is Castle Rock, and even then, I feel like there's a much bigger gap from Parker to Castle Rock as far as one high school to the next set of high schools. And then after Castle Rock, it's not until Monument that you have a potential next program,
yeah,
right?
There's only two high schools in Monument.
Exactly. Versus you go up north and there's 3 high schools in Broomfield. Brighton is not that far off. Even as you keep climbing up the highway, you go up to Longmont. 3 high schools that, are pretty competitive in football. You go up a little bit more north and you have your Meade, you have your Erie. Those are definitely schools that want in on this. It's not until you get to, no, I'd say probably once you're at Erie, there's a pretty sizable gap until Loveland. For the next school program, right? So you definitely it's easier to crawl up, the I-25 north for a lot more of these programs.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I already know this, and Kodey, you do as well, but a lot of those programs and, coaches, athletes, parents up there up north, I feel know about what's going on in Denver or at least feel like they're more connected to that. And so those programs are honestly probably going to come up naturally. I expect that there's probably going to be a couple that will pop up here in the next year, in this next season, to be completely honest with you, because they feel like they could go win state this year and whatnot and go compete and be extremely competitive for sure, which is obviously a huge driving force because you don't want to start a losing program. You want to at least feel like you got a good shot at it too, which I know is a motivator in some of those in some of those areas for sure, as they're usually pretty competitive in all sports. But coming down south, I mean, there's a big disconnect between Denver and Colorado Springs, I would say. Not just distance-wise, but culturally too. But regardless, I know they want to play, which is definitely a big deal. And so if I'm the Broncos or Chas or whoever, and if you don't know, then you need to know this right now, that you're going to have to make a bigger effort reaching down south than up north. So that's the next step in growth here. But with that being said, I mean, let's talk about what's next moving forward here, Kodey. Do you have anything you wanted to say before we move on? Sorry, I didn't want to just abruptly move on there.
No, I think that we said everything that needs to be said. I think that there's a pretty clear plan of growth here. And, I think that everyone wants to be involved. The interest is clearly there. And, I think that there's a pretty good plan of attack I do want to say, as somebody who literally runs a flag football program for Highlands Ranch, we run an indoor one, so that has its perks and its quirks. But, I do think that even though these Highlands Ranch high schools weren't in on the inaugural season, I feel like I can see a growth in girls' participation in flag football. We run 5-on-5, which obviously fundamentally operates just a little bit differently than sevens. But I do think that, especially as we start to have these high schools with programs, I think that the youth, there's going to be a boom in youth interest in flag football. And so the state of Colorado needs to be ready for that. And I feel like that's probably a little bit more on the private sector, like your AYLs and stuff. But do be on the lookout for that boom coming up here, basically, in the next few years as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely going to be a big deal. I do want to talk about some things to look for moving forward here, because obviously first year there's a lot to talk about. It's not completely perfect, but I definitely have some things that I would like for the state to potentially progress to, because here's the thing: I don't want the state to be stuck at this level of girls high school flag football forever. You gotta make some improvements, and I think one of those improvements is allowing girls to play a full field. Just being completely real with you, that's what they do in Florida. That's what they do in Georgia. I'm pretty sure. That's definitely what they do in Nevada. In Colorado, at least to start this season, I mean, they definitely didn't play a full field. They didn't even play a half a field, really. It was maybe a third, right, Kodey?
Yeah, I mean,
sideways.
It was a third. Yeah, they split it into thirds horizontally. And, for the championship, they were playing on 2. And, I mean, it's cool that you can have 3 games going on at the same time. But, obviously, that limits playbooks, growth, opportunity to make plays, etc., etc. It kind of has a snowball effect on the sport itself. So I think that's a great thing.
And it just doesn't translate well to the next level, because how are you gonna have? I mean, I don't know. Like, how it's gonna be really hard to convince one of these colleges to pick up a quarterback who only had to drive at most 30 or 40 yards, when they could have someone like Madison Carrera, or, okay, here, let me go down a couple of steps, but a quarterback from Florida who has played on 100-yard fields / 80-yard fields her whole life. It's just not, you can't vouch for that. On top of that, on defenses, I mean, they're working with a smaller field, a lot more narrower. There's not a lot of space. They could use the sideline for a lot more help and whatnot, so that affects flag pulling. And then offensively, you don't really know what you have there unless you just have really elite, like football players who are just making players miss and whatnot and breaking tackles and all that great stuff. So it affects the game inherently as far as translation goes. And sorry, Kodey, what were you gonna say there?
I was just going to say, obviously, the dimensions has a big impact on recruiting in the next level, but I also just think that we need to get them more opportunities to play in a very electric atmosphere as well. I know that it's tough to get the field, especially when the seasons are happening at the same time, but God, how sweet would it be to see some of these games under the lights too? Like, as far as just generating buzz and excitement, and I mean, it really is a different atmosphere and a different animal when you get to play under the lights. And, I do think it's possible to do so, especially at like some of the huge field compounds that Colorado does have, where it's just field after field after field after field. And I know that it's an alternate route, but I think it's a worthy one. I look at, like, there's a ton of sports parks in Aurora where the ability to play on a full field under the lights is optional, and still have multiple games happening at the same time. I know it's not exactly at the high school, but there are ways to work with and around and really just, I think, provide more opportunities for these athletes to have more exciting experiences, and also maybe not the under the lights part translating to the next level quite yet, but just a chance to really form some great memories as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that might be a money thing, honestly, now that I think about it. But honestly, if the Broncos really care, they would go ahead and pay for all those fees too. Because now that I'm really thinking about it, they never had like a jamboree where they actually had to turn on the lights or turn on a lot of the facilities, really. And so, hey, we noticed that. It would be a lot more flexible for other teams to, maybe play closer tonight or in the afternoon. Also, it would help our schedule as well. But, just putting that out there. So, yeah, that's definitely a big deal for sure. But, yeah, I mean, facilities, fields for sure. I think those things are things that I definitely want to see, like, improve. Another thing I would definitely like to see improve moving forward is just, like, brands, I guess, and like player recognition as well. Not all the teams that participate in the fall have social media, and I'm just gonna be real with you. At this point, it's vital. Because it's not just for recruitment; it's also for advertising your program to other athletes. Or just people in general who are looking to get into something, right? Looking to get into a new sport or try something new, for sure. I'm sure there were plenty of players who played this last fall who didn't play really a sport before, or maybe it has been a minute they played a sport before, but it wasn't the best fit. But football is a really good fit for them. And so you got to advertise that, not just to your school, but to your community, especially considering it is open enrollment out here in Colorado. And so you got to absolutely do that. Plus it does help with recruitment and understanding, hey, there's colleges not in Colorado here. There's colleges in Kansas and Florida that primarily recruit. You got to have some sort of way to reach out to them or at least show that you exist. And so posting rosters, posting highlights, all that stuff. I think posting highlights for sure is the biggest thing because they're not streamed anywhere right now, which is another thing that I hope that improves moving forward. And so presence on social media for a lot of these teams is absolutely going to be huge. So definitely hoping to see more of those teams, take a step into the social media world, which is also where we're at. And so that, we're able to like tag those programs and find players easier and all of that great stuff. And on top of that, those programs and players could reach out to us and we could also repost their stuff as well because we are also a platform and tool for them to use. So there's definitely that for sure. Kodey, what do you think about social media and how important that'll be for these programs? Because I know there are some football programs out there that don't have social medias, but they're established as football programs. It's a new age right now. It's 2023. I feel like you have to have like some sort of social media presence, right?
Well, I just think that with flag football culture, I feel like it's very social media driven, even more so than tackle football, I would say. And, it is just the mode of communication. It's the mode of building hype. It's the mode of building buzz. And, it's part of what makes it a lot of fun, I would say, is the social media aspect of flag football, I think, is very different culturally than the tackle football social media aspect. And I do think that it's integral to the sport, and I do think that these programs do need to get up on that. I think that obviously, having sections on their website is going to be huge for that. I think that, just their marketing in general of their teams could take a step up, but the social media aspect is very, very important and a critical improvement for these programs to take a step forward. I think if we're talking just in general, I don't know if it's set in stone that flag football is a fall sport. I know that there are some big spring sports, but there's just something logistically that seems like it should be different. I don't know if that's something that is going to change. I don't know if that's something that can change even, but I mean, it is something to at least float out there, don't you think?
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that next. I'm going to put this out there as well. For Colorado, it's different. Obviously, if you're playing in the spring in Florida, it's going to be nice. I mean, really playing whenever, it's going to be nice. Playing in Nevada near the winter, it's going to be pretty good, but playing in the spring in Colorado, and also throwing out there that Colorado has like one indoor football field that's not owned by a professional team or a college team, which sucks, which I don't understand. It's so stupid, but there's only one indoor football field. It makes things really unpredictable, because in case you're not from Colorado and you're listening to this, it could literally snow at any time during the spring. In fact, it honestly snows the most.
We're going to get snow this
Yes.
week in April that we're recording this.
Oh,
we're
yeah,
getting
and
snow
it's 70
this week.
degrees. Like, it was literally 70 degrees today, and it will be for the next 5 days. But it's about to snow on Saturday. So that's that. And that's life. That's spring sports. And, Kodey and I, we both work in the sport industry here in Colorado. I mean, when it comes to, well, more for me because I do more outdoor stuff. But when it comes to outdoor spring sports, there's always an asterisk. There's always a, maybe we will play all the games this season. But without a doubt, we're most likely going to have to reschedule. And there's honestly probably going to be games that we just won't be able to play at all. And it is what it is, because we have to move on to the next sport, right? That's just how it works here in Colorado. And so, obviously, it would be really convenient, and it would definitely help us a lot if it moved to the spring and it was in between sports and whatnot. But considering it is an outdoor sport, and considering Colorado's lack of ability to build like fields that are inside, yeah, I don't know. It kind of just puts us at a weird disadvantage. Like, we basically, like, it's more predictable to play in the fall. Like, you could predict the weather a lot better in the fall than in the spring, right? Would you say that's a pretty big thing to consider here, at least in Colorado, Kodey?
Look, I mean, I've seen it snow in September as well in my lifetime here. So, I think that if they're trying to avoid the weather, that's... I don't know. I'm always a fan of the weather playing a role in the games. It was some of the most fun I ever had. I feel like obviously tackle's a little bit different than flag. You probably are a little bit warmer if you're tackling people. But, I think that indoor facilities never hurt, obviously, because then you can avoid lightning, I feel like, is the big enemy of football. Simon, you and I had a very specific experience during the tackle season with this. But, I think that while it would be nice, I also just don't think, like, avoiding the weather, I don't know. I don't see the huge necessity of it personally. And there's, I mean, have you seen what's on the sidelines these days? Like, they have straight up lamp heaters on the sidelines now. So, I mean, I just don't think being warm they're fine. It builds character or whatever. I'm going to sound like a real boomer here, but I just think that, using I think the weather's just an excuse rather than, attempting to work through it or play through it. Like, it's not a baseball diamond where it's going to get all muddy and slushy. I mean, it's a field. A lot of the fields actually have been changed to turf anyway. So I also just don't think it's like bad grass conditions either. A lot of turfs, especially in the past 10 years here in Colorado, or a lot of fields have been switched to turf, I should say. So I think that, they're clearing them is easier than it ever has been as well. So I just want to put those out there as kind of the rebuttal to being worried about weather. Sure, I'd love to have more indoor facilities. I think that they're really nice. But also, I don't think that, we're not a state known for a lot of crazy lightning storms. that was kind of nuts what happened this past fall. But that's the fall. That's the worries that you could have. You could have those same lightning storms during the day in the fall that you could have a snowy spring. So I don't know. I don't know if it's a Colorado in me. I don't know if I'm a boomer, but I'm kind of indifferent to the weather's impact on it.
Well, it wouldn't be like a snowy day or anything. Like, just being realistic, in the spring, it'll like blizzard for a whole week, so, or a couple weeks, sometimes. So it's not just like games that are missing out, but you're also missing practices as well, which are key, because field space is key, for sure. And so, yeah, I mean, they could definitely play in the spring. I guess the Broncos are concerned about there being a drop in participation because, I mean, realistically, would you play a sport in the spring that you don't know as well when you could be playing one indoors? That's a legit... In Colorado, because, God, in some places, dude, like...
Well, I feel like competing with track and field is tough too because Colorado does produce a lot of college athletes in track and field, especially women's college track and field athletes. I feel like we had a lot of those at Arapahoe, and I've seen a lot of those success stories around the state. So I feel like that's another reason to look at it. I just think, it's fair to bring up and to kind of go back and forth on it a little bit, especially while it's in its infancy, because once it's cemented, it's not going to move. I think it's just something to keep in mind heading forward.
Yeah, no, for sure. It should definitely be moved to the spring, I would say, but they got a plan for it. They just can't be canceling games, because that's kind of my concern too. Like, I'm really concerned that if they move it to the spring, they'll like schedule a couple games, and then they'll just start... Like, once it gets over one game that they've canceled, they'll just start canceling games, and then you'll have 5-game seasons. And they're like, we don't really want to make this up. Because then it starts extending.
Yeah, you definitely can't do that. You can't put yourself in that position. And indoor fields would definitely help with that.
Well,
so
you can't.
That's a good point.
You also can't rely on indoor fields being available. Because, to be honest with you,
Yeah. Because field space is minimal.
I would say the Dallas Metroplex area has more indoor fields than the entire state of Colorado. Even if you do include the pro teams and college teams as well. I think they easily outnumber them, maybe even double or triple, to be honest with you. Because my old high school in Texas literally had like 3 indoor fields. So, turf fields. Obviously. Yeah,
what?
Did you not know this? I guess you didn't. Yeah, no, we had 3 football-sized... Well, obviously, because what else would you use it for? But basically 3 indoor football fields. And then right next to it, kind of spanning that width is like our weight room as well. So, and we weren't that good of a program. We made the playoffs once. So imagine what Allen and Kyler Murray had over there, which I could tell you is a lot better than what we had. So, yeah, the DFW area had way more fields than the entire state of Colorado. And that's honestly a reflection in what Colorado values, maybe. I'm just being completely honest with you, because that is embarrassing. But that's something for another episode, for sure. But you definitely can't rely on indoor field space, especially in the spring, I'd say. Right, Kodey? So
can't, especially with all the soccer clubs renting them out in like July of the previous year. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
So
even though they could just play outside like everyone, but go on.
It is worth looking at and comparing the seasons, and I feel like obviously there are weeks where it is less likely to be a week of nonstop blizzard and things like that. So, I think that there are solutions to the spring. And I think that there's a ton of upside in the spring as well. So, I mean, you could also argue that the upside in the fall, right, is that the, college flag football season isn't happening. So maybe they have more time to come scout in the fall or what have you. You could potentially argue that, as far as benefits, and, argue that the weather could be nicer. But, I just think that scheduling and resources wise, especially football, like coaching resources wise. Now we've ribbed on the coaching before, but you just would have more tools in the spring if you're just not running them concurrently. So, and I think that you'd have more overlap of like players helping out with the opposite genders teams as well. And, just like kind of building like program camaraderie for a school in football and spirit and etc., which is just good as far as building the buzz around the sports, respectively.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that would also help raise the talent level as well, skill level too, just because, you have players and athletes who are obviously more experienced helping out. And there are players who would definitely help out. I know we know some, Kodey, and some have expressed that to us too. But obviously they're going to focus on, their own season, especially if it's like a recruiting year, like a senior or junior year, where they really need to do well. So they can't really have their focus divided, come the fall. But I know they would definitely help if given that opportunity. So there you go. But
and the fields are available. Think of how many trainers are just using fields because they're just empty. Now, I'm not trying to, I'm not bashing on trainers. Don't get that twisted. But gosh, there are a lot of fields, high school fields that we could be using. Just have to float that out.
There definitely is. So there you go. And then I guess the last two things I do want to mention here. Number one, obviously would love for there to be a consistent and reliable streaming option. Hopefully when it becomes a sanctioned sport with CHASA, that will be something shown on NFHS. So there's that. But I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. The last thing I do really want to say is that for women's flag football here in Colorado, I hope that there are more opportunities for those athletes who just want to pursue football. And so what I'm kind of trying to get at is that I think the next step in really elevating women's flag football in this state and building pride and, camaraderie as well and getting better would be having club flag football teams that, don't play obviously during the season, but go to tournaments in the off season, because there are plenty of tournaments, and I would say also play in 7v7 tournaments, maybe 5v5 at the minimal, but 7v7 for sure. And there are plenty of tournaments for high school age girls to go play in, around the country, and there's plenty of programs who have really benefited. I would say a lot of states and areas who have really benefited from having club women's flag football teams or having dominant, club women's flag football teams do their thing at tournaments. And there are players who literally get offered at these. We will talk about 7v7 and whether, guys get offered at 7v7 tournaments. I'm just going to be honest with you. Women literally get offered at these tournaments for flag football. It literally happened. I was literally at one that happens, and there are just coaches that are there, because it's a great opportunity to see multiple prospects. And so for Colorado to really step it up and take it to a next level and truly provide a lot of opportunities for the girls in the state to not only join something in women's flag football, but compete in it and compete at one of the highest level, they have to have a club team. There has to be some sort of travel team that operates in the off season, like a TFG, like a Warriors 7v7, like a Ducks 7v7. Now, we've heard rumors about maybe one of those teams having a girls squad and whatnot, but they haven't done it yet. And, it's been a while. But I definitely think that's the next thing forward. I'm thinking about teams like Apex Predators, like the Lady Ghost out of Arizona, who doesn't have a lot of programs out there, but there are definitely a lot of players who got noticed for playing for the Lady Ghost, and they got offered, and now they're playing on the next level and starting as freshmen and doing all that great stuff. Shout out Brennan Ramirez. I'm thinking about Texas Fury, one of the most dominant programs in the entire country. Not a school, but a collection of kids from multiple schools down in that Austin-ish area, who come and play for Texas Fury, and they ball out. And literally every player, I want to say I saw them play 2 years ago, every starter from that squad from 2 years ago has been offered 5 to 6, if not been offered by every program in the country. Scholarships, top dollar, And so it does matter. It's a great opportunity to go get recruited, go get better, also build relationships with players from out of state because, it's great knowing each other as well, which it would be a great opportunity to know the great players in your state as well, but it'd also be an even better opportunity to meet players from Florida, to meet players from Arizona, Nevada, who could pass on knowledge that honestly maybe some of your coaches can't. So that is really big. I think that's definitely something that should happen here in the next couple of years that would really elevate Colorado girls football, women's football. But yeah, I mean, that's really all I have to say there. But Kodey, what do you think about what I just said? And what do you think about the idea of there being a club women's flag football team that travels?
Well, I think seeing as how that is the biggest contributor or one of the biggest contributors of next level talent as far as on the college level, I think that would be huge. I think obviously our neighbors down in Arizona have one that is pretty successful, and we've had a chance to talk to players from that club, and as far as sending a club to compete as well of the best collection, I think that that's obviously super exciting and fun to watch and root for, and so I would love nothing more than that, honestly, and for that, and just that buzz that it creates too. And it's like, well, once you start doing player highlights, it's like, oh, well, what high school do they go to? Oh, they go to Devlin High School? Whoa, I've never heard of that. And then they look into, and it creates a bigger spotlight for Colorado football in general. And, just building more bridges into Colorado for scouts of multiple sports and stuff. It comes with any national attention you can get, and a traveling club team will do exactly that for especially girls flag football into women's flag football and, athletes of other sports as well, as the microscope and the looking glass is turned their way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also do want to throw this out there. College players, high school players, even some pro players. I mean, all of them play club, flag football, in their off season. That's a pretty normal thing. Like in Florida, obviously you have your programs, but in the summer, if your squad doesn't provide a summer program, you're usually part of a club team, so you stay sharp throughout the year and whatnot, and you continue to get better because other players definitely are. And so I think this is just as much about, getting exposure for Colorado high school football as it is about giving these girls another opportunity to continue to get better and play year round, like a lot of the guys and men in this state are when they play for TFG, Ducks, Warriors, whatever, So just putting that out there, I think honestly that would really go a long way in developing the skill level and talent level in this state for sure. And yeah, I mean, if you are someone out there that's interested in doing that, let us know. We would absolutely love to help out with that. Or at least I absolutely would love to help out with that and, take a serious part in that. I don't want to speak for Kodey, but Kodey, is there anything else you want to add on before we wrap this thing up here?
I think that obviously it's better that we started it here in Colorado than not starting it. I think that's pretty obvious. And, I think that there is a ton of potential, but I think it's very, very important to do it right or do it the right way earlier rather than trying to retroactively fix a broken football culture like what we're trying to do with tackle. So I think that, it's great to address it now and just, make sure things are getting done the right way in the early part of this game here.
Yep, no, absolutely. And this will be a big part of Colorado football, period, moving forward. So there you go. But yeah, I don't really have too much more to say. I mean, hey, appreciate you sticking with us throughout this whole episode. Show us some love on social media at Playmakers Corner on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. We post updates, highlights, all that great stuff on there, and that's also a great place to know when a new episode has dropped. And speaking of episodes dropping, subscribe to us on YouTube and anywhere you can listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and leave us a comment or a good review on what you think about this episode, all that great stuff. You know, we really appreciate all of that support there. And then, yeah, I mean, NAIA women's flag
Great
football.
job.
It's wrapping up at this point, if it's not already done. First off, depending on where we're at, thank you for voting on our polls. If we haven't gone to that, make sure you go ahead and vote for our polls for our end of the year awards and all of that great stuff as well. We are doing best position players, MVP, Opoi, Depoy, and freshman of the year. So go ahead and make sure you check those out. If those episodes are out, go ahead and watch those. And regardless, I mean, go support NAIA women's flag football as well. Some great football going on. Absolutely love covering it. Definitely some of the highlights of my year doing that stuff. So yeah, there you go there. But Kodey, am I missing anything? I don't think I am here, but you know, if there is, go ahead.
No, I just want to say thank you for rocking with us and just continue especially to focus on this culture series because you, the listener, could have an impact on the future of Colorado football, no matter what facet we're talking about. And I think that it will take all of us to really elevate Colorado and quit making this place a flyover state because, gosh darn it, the talent is here. We just got to do some things to, make it easier for the rest of the country to know. But I've been one of your co-hosts, allegedly, Kodey Stauffer.
And I'm for sure your other host, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V. And I should have mentioned this on the podcast, but shout out Ryan Wesley, Jesus, and Josh Ford, Mode Ford. They also, have helped promote girls high school flag football in the state. Mode specifically, he got some really good shots. From the whole tournament, but from the championship game specifically, and he highlights some great players. Definitely a friend of the podcast, our guy. So make sure you check those guys out. But we will catch y'all later. Peace.